Morning, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you all, and thank you all very much for attending. I think this is probably the sort of maybe the kind of fifth major turbulent period of kind of commerce that I've had to work through, a number of recessions, depressions, whatever you want to call them. But always the outcome of this is, despite the sort of harsh reality of the economic turmoil, for me, the great thing about all these things is that they literally catapult us through, from in a sense of change, they catapult us into a new space. And it's that change which has always been the dynamic in our business for opportunity. Opportunity comes from these dynamic shifts. And for all you guys with all your amazing brands, some of them quite young, some of them kind of, able to go through transformation, many of them evolving out of the new digital era. It's a fantastic time if we can just grasp what's actually going on out there. And it is actually interesting, I've always criticized retail for being rather somewhat slow moving. And it's really interesting that retail, and actually commerce in many ways, is so historically slow to react to situations. So I think if you go back, the word supply and the phrase supply and demand was actually something that was sort of the notion of that was actually being hatched in the 1600s, and it was, I think, 1770 or 1776. A guy called Sir James Stewart actually adopted the term supply and demand and actually put some rhetoric around that, some narrative around it. And actually, I would think that one of the biggest things that's come out of it was coming anyway, but it's actually now, as I say, being converted into reality, is that our world is now actually about demand and supply rather than supply and demand. That is a huge shift and a huge change, and it's come about because consumers are much more thoughtful about what they need, when they need it, how they need it, whether it's something they're going to use short term and give back, or whether it's something they're going to really concerned about the future of that item in terms of its recyclability. So I actually think it's actually now so much more about demand than it is about supply actually dictating how we live our lives. And that's a real to get your head around that is really, really important. You can look at some of the situations that are happening on the high street, and some people say, well, digital was the death of the high street, but that's absolutely rubbish. What it's doing is actually redefining what the high street's for, and in an urban sense, in a much kind of greater, broader sense about how we're going to live our lives. And you have to remember that people were actually moving back into the cities big time, and not just the sort of capital cities in the UK, all the cities, Manchester, Birmingham, Newcastle, Edinburgh, all these cities have become, really interesting for people to live in. And this pandemic has actually given us an opportunity to make some sense of certain parts of those areas. And of course, whilst there's been terrible suffering for a lot of people, it kind of almost enables us to have a clean sheet in terms of where we go from here. I think just kind of moving on to the first slide, just before I kind of get into the detail of this, I've just picked out, sort of half a dozen slides that I want to talk in more detail. The report that you've got that you look at, is 44 pages long, and we would be here for till after the bank holiday if we went through the whole thing. So I'll do my best to get through even these short topics. But just touching, as I did there, on kind of, the reformatting of the high street. You look at people like John Lewis, for instance, who are converting, they've basically done a deal with Westminster City Council to enable them to actually use up to 45% of their flagship store for office space. And we know, for instance, some of the old Debenham stores, as they were, for instance, Harrods, are looking at converting some of the upper floors into accommodations. So, nothing, there will be a group of people out there that will be delighted to be able to say, yeah, I'm living in Leeds or Bradford or wherever it is, but actually, where do you live? Oh, I live above Harrods. It's got a wonderful cachet, hasn't it? And that in itself is somebody, an established retailer, both of them established retailers, saying, actually, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to get a bunch of people close to where our physical representation is going to be. And whether it's John Lewis in Oxford Street, having office people working in the offices above, they're creating a sort of community in that sense of understanding that people want to be able to work and shop and perhaps do their workouts or whatever it is. They want to be able to do those very close to where they are at that particular moment. And I think yes, that's definitely a spin-off of the pandemic, that none of us want to be kind of exposing ourselves beyond what we have to in terms of kind of travel and mixing with people, but also this was coming anyway. The pandemic has just accelerated it, really. So we were feeling this way beforehand. We were already thinking about how we want to shop. Do we want to shop digitally? Do we want to shop physically? How can we bring those things closer together? So all this was happening. And during the pandemic, the rise of TikTok and the activity that they had in the digital sense is just phenomenal. And it always, I always say with any great idea, you need demand, but you also need to be able, you need to be able to come up with a great idea, but you also need that demand. And for somebody like TikTok, this 18-month period has actually created a sort of a fantastic window of opportunity for them. But already straight away, as soon as we can get out back into physical space, you're seeing TikTok and Westfield putting on an event which is basically a digital event but in a real life situation. And that to me is now the kind of a clear understanding of the fact that digital and physical can work together, and actually need to work together, because we need to be able to take it wherever we want it. We need to be able to take it in our homes, in our living rooms, and kind of in our home offices that we've mackled together during the time when we can't move. But we also want to have an experience like this in the other places we want to be, out in the world, at Westfield, as we move around outside the confines of our own sort of spaces. So this is a fantastic example to me of how that evolution has actually taken place, and how the last 18 months has enabled some kind of new thinking. And I think the other thing that we're going to see is this repurposing of retail. Repurposing is something that I'll just touch on in a few minutes' time, but in the sense of products, but in the sense of retail itself, this is a great opportunity for people who have some sense of provenance, craftsmanship, who have some sense of explanation, but most importantly, experience to offer a consumer. What we must think about as retail now is being a pleasurable experience, a delight for our customers, and not necessarily just an opportunity for them to go away with a bag. In fact, I would almost say that that side of it can be managed in other ways. First and foremost, retail in a general sense needs to be thought about in the sense of how people who have made the effort to come into your space are actually going to feel, and how they're going to be kind of bought into bought into your brand. Think about it's an expression I used to use, but sort of even back a couple of years ago. Start to think about retail, if you like, as a portal for all the things that your product or your brand needs to convey. And it could be anything from obviously explaining the benefits of the product, etc. But it could also be a place to meet like-minded, interested people who could become, who you could actually recruit as in some way as being part of your a part of your brand, and if not just as a sort of follower, maybe even somebody that is more active in your business. So think about the retail space as actually being an opportunity for that interaction. An interview space almost. Interview everybody that comes in and find out what their interests are. That they will be varied. They'll probably sit in sort of 10 different categories, but here's a great opportunity for you to gather really concise information about how people are working and what they want and how they want to be involved with actually what you're offering and what you're doing. And in that vein, during the when the pandemic hit, I remember I was actually on holiday at the end of March that year, and we pretty much could see our whole order book for the whole year at that point, which is absolutely fantastic. Get to March, know what you're doing right through to the end of the year. Absolutely incredible. I think within a month that had dropped to, the projection had kind of dropped to about 50%. And I think by the end of April, by the end of April, it dropped to about 50%. By the end of May, we were actually wondering, we couldn't see more than sort of 25% of the year's work. So it was pretty traumatic. And I happened to be working on a concept for kiosks, actually, for railway stations, etc., which is kind of bringing retail, but in a much more robust form as pop-ups and various different activities into other public spaces. And Minty, actually, who I think is on this call, just happened to mention one day, she said, Dad, what's the most Google thing on the internet at the moment? I said, Minty, you're going to tell me because I really don't know. And she said, well, it's home offices. And so I said, okay, here we go. Our kiosks can become home offices. And this has been an extraordinary venture for us. Here I am, I'm 65. I'm not looking to start a new business anytime soon, but actually I am. I think all my family will tell you I'll be doing that to the day, till the last day I can. But here we are with focused breathing rooms, and this has been a fantastic, because I've never in all my 40 plus years of working kind of in retail really provided directly a B2C product. It's always been B2B. And here I am now, talking to people about how they're going to use this space, what's valuable to them, what are the things that the triggers for them in terms of this kind of working for them. And we've pitched this at a space whereby, we're actually offering buildings. They're expensive. They're not the wooden shed things. They're not the cheap ones. These are things that are going to last for, they're guaranteed for the shells are guaranteed for 25 years. So, they're an absolute asset. And, if you, whatever you spend, if you spend 30, 40, 50, 100 grand on these things, and you're in central London, you're probably adding 2 or 3 or 4 times the value to your house just by doing it. So, but they are still a very considered expense, and they've got to deliver to the requirements of all those people. And some people are looking to kick their kids out of their house so that they don't have them in there. They've got these teenagers that don't want them all the time. Others are looking at it as a sort of sanctuary because maybe they've got a young family and they need to have a space where they can work, where they haven't got screaming kids around them or what have you. And other people are looking to do amazing creative things. We're just building one now for a ceramicist, and we've done one for a lady who kind of she takes her work out on a pole, so she's like a pole dancer, a kind of environment, and all these different requirements are all lifestyle choices, and they all mean to us as we have to kind of look at our products and say, right, okay, fine, much as we would love to plonk a standard fixture unit in there, from our commerciality perspective, much better to make 50 all the same. This is just not going to happen. We've got to have a dialogue with all these people, really understand how they're going to use it, and then see from an engineering perspective whether we can actually, or an aesthetic perspective, how we can deliver it. And then the next thing, of course, if you deal with a pole dancer, they're going to have a really a different kind of approach. They're going to make sure that their pole doesn't come down when they're 2.5 meters up in the air. So from an engineering perspective, they're going to be concerned about that. The ceramicist, who works in layers all the time, says, oh, let's just put the shell up and then we'll decide what the interior is going to look like, or the exterior is going to look like. And we'll say, well, no, we can't do that. We've got to know how we work from the start. We've got to know what it looks like and how it's going to be. And then we're thinking, actually, do we? Hey, maybe we don't. Maybe we can just put the shell up, and she can live with it, and she can say, I'm now in my space. How do I want it to manifest itself? So we're having to really think differently and change, and having to really consider what every customer, not just what they want, but how they want their space to manifest. It's really, really interesting. And then we kind of get into what's happening, and I think I've talked about the city centres and things like that. And I think the one thing again to come out of this last period, of course, is the importance of local. People are kind of supporting their local communities in so many different ways, whether it's from a charitable perspective, or whether it's from a kind of sort of supporting local shops and all that sort of stuff. It's just a massive shift again, this. And what we've actually worked out, of course, is that local doesn't mean you have to move out into some sort of tiny village in the middle of nowhere, and which has got sort of 2 shops and everything else like that. What we're doing here is actually creating local environments in urban centres. So I think actually there's been quite a lot of work done in, for instance, in Paris and in Italy. They're looking at this the 15-minute city. It's a really interesting example of how governments and local councils and local kind of influencers are able to sort of think about this. So for instance, in Paris, they've got a university working there at Sorbonne, looking at what this actually means in terms of a planning, from a planning perspective, how they can include work, shops, entertainment, home, health, education, all those things within 15 minutes of where you live. It's just an incredible sort of concept. So we're going to see this sort of shift from us having to jump on a tube or a bus to get to a particular location. We're going to look around us immediately, first and foremost, and say, can I satisfy my shopping needs and other things as well, literally by getting putting my shoes on and walking there, or just maybe jumping on a push bike. So this is a massive shift in terms of the whole sort of high street the whole high street layout and how things operate. And what I'm seeing here is, I'm seeing all the time, I'm seeing that this is a fantastic opportunity for retail. This is really the kick up the arse that it's needed for probably since the last recession in 2008. And we all kind of thought that in 2008 we were going to have this huge shift, and maybe all we really saw was the sort of loss of the 2 for 3 or buy one and get something for nothing, and all that sort of stuff. People became much more brand conscious, and were actually prepared to, at that point, to shop the brand and go away with one thing and get nothing, but get the thing that they wanted. But it didn't really fundamentally change the landscape. We still stuck with the old models. And now what we're able to see is this sort of fantastic push forward. And in terms of the kind of whole village approach, I mean, even somebody in luxury, and I do think that we should look to luxury for a lot of the sort of how we manage customers and how we treat customers in our own space. So that the luxury industry is really doing that very well. But you look at Anya Hindmarsh here on Pont Street. I mean, she's literally creating an Anya Hindmarsh village. She's got her cafe, she's got her veg store, she's got her bespoke store, she's got a plastic store, all these things, and she's actually created this whole sort of community around her brand, etc. And again, I think that's something we're going to see much more of in the future. So yes, resale fridges, the kind of whole process of recycling and basically the resale market again is just a massive shift. And in terms of inventory and manufacturing and stock control and all sorts of things like that, it's just turning the whole of this area of retail on its head. And I think it's incredible to see the numbers that are now coming up. I think we're talking about the doubling basically of resale market year on year. There are figures as much as sort of 80 billion being discussed. A huge impact this is actually having on the market. And TikTok again has been one of those platforms that's been incredibly helpful in terms of resale and secondhand processing of secondhand goods, etc. I think it's Depop, isn't it, and thrift flippers and all sorts of things like that. All these sort of things are coming out, and this is fantastic, because it means that the resource that we've got for other things, for manufacturing, etc., can be refocused, not necessarily just on the cheapest, but it's showing a real sense of ownership and purpose. And I think that more valuable, it has huge implications in terms of the economy. It has huge implications in terms of minimum wage and slave labor and all those sorts of things. It's a massive shift, which is fantastic to see. And I'm glad it's certainly happening in a big way in my lifetime, because it's something that as a business we've advocated for very, very many years. And change and newness often sometimes take out the opportunity for kind of, you know, pushing this sort of thing forward. But now it's great to see that we've got this actually really happening. And collaboration, if you'd asked, if you talked to me about collaboration, I probably would have said partnership, probably as little as maybe a month or two ago. And what we were seeing before the pandemic is we were seeing the advent of partnership, but in a sort of slow sort of way. So it may have been something like Amazon kind of taking a stake in Kohl's department stores in the US, for instance. And, you know, why would they want to do that? Well, they want to do that because it's a place they realized that, you know, a lot of their customers went. So they originally, it was kind of more about returns and, you know, making it convenient for customers to actually take things back. And some of their customers were showing concern about the number of white vans there are on the road. And, you know, they didn't want another white van just to come and pick something up that they were returning, and how they're going to manage that. So kind of Amazon moving into a department store environment. But then, you know, then you see all of a sudden, you know, that becomes a sort of hotbed for another retailer as well. And I believe that if it hasn't already happened, it will happen soon. That now we're seeing as many as 200 Sephora's concessions are popping up in the Kohl's department store environment. So, you know, there you've got actually a number of guys saying, you know, we could actually, you know, you might be a competitor of ours in one sense, but actually we all want the same thing. We all want to get to the customers. We all want to be where those customers are. Whatever, you know, let's put aside all of our different kind of sort of thoughts on this, and let's kind of, you know, work together to make the most of it, for, again, putting the customer absolutely at the top of the tree and saying, how do we best service them? And, you know, we will see a lot of, I mean, we're working on several right now, fantastic new partnerships, people saying, okay, fine, I need distribution, these people have the footfall. Where do we do it? How do we do it? How do we make this work? And I love this particular example of collaboration and the way it's shifting. You know, you've actually got a number of different skincare providers who are all looking at how they can manage their the kind of environmental crisis regarding packaging waste, and actually how they, by getting together, they become so much more of a force in actually moving this forward quickly. And by God, we have to move it forward quickly, because, you know, if anybody hasn't, you know, anybody out there isn't sure of how much damage we've done in the last sort of, well, in the industrialized process, you know, certainly we really do have to move quickly to have a chance of saving our planet from terrible things. But anyway, here we are, you know, again, a fantastic example of how that's going. And, you know, end of efficiency, you know, there's a whole kind of piece that I probably don't have time to go through, because I'm conscious that I'm taking quite a lot of time on this. But there are several businesses that are looking at the kind of, you know, how they measure their success in terms of degrowth. And, you know, one of the things here, we've got small batch blended fragrances, the small batch process. You make as much as you need to do from your business perspective. I see it locally, we have a head office actually outside of London, up in Market Harborough, with a factory. And, you know, we've got all sorts of guys there, bakers and all sorts of things. You know, you don't get that by 11 o'clock, you don't get anything. So it's you know, but they know that there's no wastage in terms of their offer. They know literally by day how many loaves of bread they're going to sell, how many chocolate brownies. They know on Friday people want a super brownie, you know, they want something that's got more chocolate or more bad things in it than they do on a Monday, and on it goes. And it's just brilliant to see a business like that thriving in a situation where all they're doing is actually talking to their customers, understanding what they want, getting them involved in actually in the menu of things they have to offer, and enabling you know, a two-way relationship between customer and provider. And so, but there is a whole thing, it's a whole topic on degrowth retail, and how that's actually going to shift things from consumerism to community and all sorts of things like that. So something that was talked about as far back in 1955 by the gentleman who was one of the managers at the Ford Motor Company, and how community would become a much more important part of our life. But it's taken us, I can't work out how many years it is between 1955 and now, but it's a lot. And we were talking about it then. Let's hope that we'll start to action some of these things now. It'd be really good.